So I recently did a video on the Ozark trail knife in D2, and I was a little bit disappointed because the lock was sticking pretty bad out of the box, and it was very annoying. Well, I will say that over time, since I've been opening and closing it, it no longer sticks, and it's working fine. This knife has become very popular. A lot of people went out and got them, but a lot of people also were not able to get them because they sold out very quick and have not been back in stock. Overall, for $10, it's absolutely not a bad knife, and you're not going to be finding D2 steel knives for that price. Today I'm going to do some tests with it and see just how much it can do. We're going to start off doing some stuff you'd probably be doing in your day-to-day life or at work, and we're also going to do some harder use that you probably shouldn't be doing with a knife, because let's face it, cheap knives always get used the hardest because you just don't really care that much about breaking them as much as more expensive knives. So we're going to see just how much it can take, but to compare, we also have another Ozark trail knife. The main difference between these two is this one has just stainless steel. They just say stainless steel, so it's probably a very cheap steel. It's a steel they use on most, if not all, of their other knives. We're going to see just how much better the D2 is to the standard steel. Our first test is going to represent what you might normally be putting the knife through on a day-to-day basis, and that's going to be cutting some cardboard. We're going to do an equal amount of cuts with these on the cardboard and see just how good the edge retention is, see if it keeps a sharp edge. So before the test, here we go. We got the D2 on, nice and sharp. And here's the other one in the stainless steel, both very sharp. I don't know what it is with the Ozark trail knives. I think it's just because they are lower cost. Every Ozark trail knife I've gotten to this point has had a pretty noticeable burr on it. A little bit of stropping helps you out a lot, but it's almost like they don't deburr these from the factory. Probably to save some cost, but once you strop them up, they are pretty good. My guess, I didn't actually say it before, but my guess is that obviously the D2 is going to have better edge retention. That's to be expected. Well, let's do 25 with the other one and see. Okay, we got 25 cuts done with either one. Let's see if it still cuts paper. First up, the D2. So it's not too bad. It's not exactly what it was like before. It's a little bit rougher, just a little bit though. But it still manages to cut the paper. It's not super clean anymore though. But not too bad. Let's go ahead and try the stainless steel one, see what that's like. That's not too bad either. Okay, so it still cuts. Hey, get out of here. Another 20 cuts, here we go. Would you stop? Pretty surprising, the friction actually gets the knife super hot when they're doing this. Let's see how they held up. First, the D2. Yeah, that's 50 cuts of cardboard, and it is noticeably dulled. Very rough, but still manages to cut the paper. You know, they feel actually very similar. I think the D2 is noticeably better, but not by too much. All right, well, let's do some more. Towards the end there, the stainless steel one definitely started feeling less sharp. It was going a lot rougher through the cardboard. It feels a little bit duller than the D2. Yeah, the D2 is definitely a little bit sharper, it seems. Definitely rough. But you can see, that's where we're cutting the cardboard. See that? It still slices pretty good. The normal one, yeah, a little rougher, but actually not that bad. That's 70 cuts of the cardboard each. But let's go ahead and try and see if the stropping brings an edge back a little bit. There's a little bit of, there's a noticeable amount of side-to-side movement after doing that. When I was doing the strop there, I could feel it shifting back and forth, and there's a little bit of forward play and side-to-side play with this one. Surprisingly, this one is a lot more solid. There's no play in this one at all. Well, now that I'm using my hand, there's a tiny bit of side-to-side, maybe a tiny bit, not too much forward to back. This one feels pretty solid. This one feels a little bit, there's a little bit of movement there. But let's see, after the strop, let's test out. Did the sharpness come back? You could see it's a little rough at the edge where it was cutting mostly. But I think most people would be decently happy. It's still a good working edge. The D2, yeah, a lot cleaner. Yeah, that nearly came back to perfect. Yeah, look at that, super smooth. That's 70 cuts through cardboard. Yeah, I mean, if that shows anything, the D2 is a lot better in terms of edge retention. It came back nearly perfect after that strop. This one, not so much, and we did about the same passes on the strop. The D2 is a lot sharper, but this is not too bad. There will come a time when you're using your knife where you have to scrape something. You're gonna end up scraping perpendicular to whatever it is you're scraping at a 90-degree angle. Now that's pretty rough on the apex of the edge. I'm gonna do like 30 scrapes with each one, see how it holds up. I would not be surprised if that wrecked the edge. So let's test out. Wow. That's still very good on the D2. About the other one. Yeah, wow, that is. They're both very good still. Super clean. Let's do some more. We did 50 more scrapes on either side. That's a lot of scraping. I probably won't do any more than that. So if it still cuts the paper, then that's pretty good. We'll test the D2 first. Yeah. Definitely impressed with that. That's pretty good. That's a lot of scraping too. Probably more than you'd be doing ever. And both the knives are really good after that. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to do any more of that, but that still cuts really clean. It doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of damage done. I mean, wood is a lot softer. If you're doing that on other material, it might come out worse, but on the wood at least, that was pretty good. My next test, however, won't be so kind. Knives are made for cutting, and they should never be used as a pry bar. But sometimes when a knife's the only thing you have on you, you may put your knife subject to prying something out. Admit it, you've probably done it once before. A lot of people do it. So we're gonna pry 5 staples out of this wood with each knife. The one saving grace here is this wood is a little bit punky, so it might not be so bad to pull them out. Yeah, I mean, I might get some harder wood. You saw how easy that was. Yeah, super, super easy. because this wood is super soft. Yeah, I am going to try a different piece of wood. Let's use the piece of wood that we were just scraping. So they're not going in super cleanly to the wood. I don't think the staples are in that hard. So this is really not a hard test at all for these things. Even though those staples weren't very hard to pull out, I do notice some visible edge damage. Don't know if that's coming across on camera, but there's a little tiny bit of damage. It's visible to the eye. And on the D2, it almost seems like there's a little bit more damage in terms of chipping. Like I said, I don't think it comes across that well on camera, but when I hold it up close to my eye, there are some chips at the very tip of the blade where we were prying the staples. But we're not done with the staples yet. Don't think these knives got off easy because the staples weren't going in right. We're gonna use the staples again. We're gonna put some staples down and we're gonna pound through the staples with the edge, see if and how it damages the edge. It'll be interesting to compare. D2 has been known as very chippy because of its larger carbides. So we'll see if that one chips, and maybe this one, if it's softer, cheaper, maybe it'll just roll. I don't know when you'd be ever doing this with your knife, but we're just trying to see how these things hold up to abuse. Let's get it through the staple. Oh man, that's just shoving the staple straight into the wood. Let's do a little pile of staples here. Now let's immediately go to the other knife. Wow, there definitely is edge damage on both. Hey, remember how I said that this knife was a little bit loose in the side to side and this one was very solid? Well, this one, you can probably see that there's a lot of movement now just after banging on it a little bit. I bet it's got to be tightened up because that's very loose now. This one didn't actually change that much from doing that. Let's check out the edge. Don't know if you can see the edge that well, but there's definitely chips, though they are pretty small, on the blade where we were hitting those staples. As well as this knife, you can see where the light's hitting it. Though the difference is, this one seems like it's more chipped. This one seems like it's more rolled, which would make sense if this is a much softer steel, but just running my finger on the edge, this one definitely feels more rough, and the D2 held up a lot better. Even though it's known as a brittle steel, it held up a lot better than whatever this steel is. And just to show the damage, let's try the paper. Yeah, so once it gets to where we were hitting the staples, it does not cut. Obviously it's sharp back here because we weren't doing anything back there. Right here though, well, you can still saw. The damage isn't unusable. You'd still be able to use this for some stuff, but it's definitely not razor sharp with those big chips in it. And the D2, obviously sharp in the back, and that is not bad at all. Absolutely, it is still usable. Obviously it's not slicing cleanly, but that is pretty decent, I must say. With those small chips from the staples, these knives are easily repairable. But how would the knife hold up if you dropped it horizontally? Missed the second one. Interestingly, I stuck the Ozark trail knife. Still seems to be working fine. However, this knife, it landed and hit the rear, and when I walked up, the lock was disengaged. Nearly every time this one hits with just the liner lock, it disengages the lock and starts to close. However, this one, the D2 knife with the axis bar or the crossbar lock, that stays open the entire time. Those Omega springs are holding it up, and it's pretty secure. Even with the force, it is not closing it. I keep hitting this one in the back, and it's stuck into the wood backwards because of how soft this wood is now. But you notice that the knife basically closes every time it's hitting the wood. I don't know if this one would do the same if it hit the back, because I keep hitting it on the front. Let's just throw it at the back and see if it closes. Nope, it remains good. Wow, it definitely has worn in a lot. It's way smoother than it was new. But, don't know if you can hear that. There's definite movement in the blade. Side to side, there's quite a bit. And this one, there is a lot of side to side movement here. A lot. Let's move on to the next test though. If we have not already entered the realm of what you should not be doing with a pocket knife, then we have definitely entered it now. We're gonna baton through wood with it, and that's going to be an incredibly tough test. Folders are not really made to baton, and I would never baton with a folder unless of course it was the Cold Steel SR1 or the 4 Max, because those things are absolute beasts. But a standard folding knife, yeah, I would not want to baton with one. But let's just see how we do it. First, we're going to start off with some softer wood that's a little bit on the rotten side. Not quite yet, it's getting there. This is softer, will be a little bit easier on it. And if there's a time to wear gloves and eye protection, it's right now, because if the knife is gonna break, it'll be on this test. Let's try the Ozark Trail in D2. We'll just do a straight down, a couple whacks. That's really in there, okay. Then we'll do a sideways one to get a chip of wood out. Let's do it the other way, get another chip out. A little bit of prying action too. Let's go straight to the other knife. We'll do a couple straight downs again. Would you look at that? The lock disengaged when I was doing that. A little bit of prying action in there too. Lock seems to be disengaging. It's super loose, that lock. Might be a little bit because of that blade play now. It's able to shift very easily. Not holding up that well, though the D2 knife is still performing well. Although there is movement, like I said before, and it's definitely a little bit more movement in it. Let's hit it a couple more times. Oh no. Oh no. Oh, I didn't think that was gonna happen. That is a huge chunk of blade. Wow. Okay, well, I got to do the same thing with the other knife now. Okay, I'm hitting the other one just as hard. The thumb stud is gone, but the blade is still fine. It's still a usable knife. Wow, I can't believe that thing broke. Actually, I can believe it, but I'm still surprised. Let's really dig into this one now that the D2 is broken. At this point, the D2 would have broke. And this one, it's loose. Like I said, it's very loose. I mean, that blade that's extremely loose. But check the blade out. It's still intact. The D2 knife, look, the D2 knife is thinner. It is thinner. It's got a hollow grind. It makes it good at slicing, but it doesn't give it much strength. Where this knife, I mean, I wouldn't be comfortable using this knife even at this point. I would want to take it apart. Unfortunately, you got to take the pocket clip off to get to the pivot screw to tighten it, but I would definitely want to tighten the pivot screw before ever using this knife again. This thing is still usable. I mean, you could still use this, right? You got about 1.5 inches of straight edge at the top, so you could use it. It still closes fine. The lock mechanism works. So you could use it, right? You could use it, but you're losing a lot of cutting edge there. This steel, the stainless steel, this has a hollow grind too, but it's a little thicker, and it did not break, and I was really banging it. Let's just do some drilling. See what the tip does. The tip is bent to the right. You can see that. The tip is a little bit bent to the right, and this tip does not seem bent. If it does seem bent at the top, that is actually the grind. It's a little bit uneven from the factory. The tip is still straight. Definitely bent on the D2. Let's try a little bit of prying action too to see how well the tip holds up. Just to some prying, we're gonna put the knife in a little bit and just try to pry out some pieces of wood here. I mean, I could probably snap that. Just try to pry out some pieces on the edge here. It's not doing poorly here. It's doing okay. And I actually just bent it back to straight. Let's just do some prying with this one real quick, just to see, just to compare. And yeah, I mean, this one has a much thicker tip. I wouldn't be worried about bending this one as much. On the Batoning, it broke. Well guys, I broke it. Yep, the Batoning broke it, but we got to see its limit. We got to see how it breaks out. The blade is definitely weaker behind the edge there. It's pretty thin. It's a hollow grind. The blade's already thin. Your breakouts with D2 are gonna be pretty big. Does this make it a bad knife? No, it doesn't make it a bad knife at all. You can see that the amount of things we were doing to it. The knife was holding up fine until we got into the real torture, right? It holds a really good edge, which is what, you know, you're gonna use a knife for mainly. You're gonna be cutting with it, slicing, especially a knife like this. You open up your packages, your letters, opening up boxes to more knives, opening up more Ozark trail knives maybe, I don't know. The knife's gonna be fine and all that. Even with the staples, it only got minor chips, which you could very easily sharpen out. Okay, the knife held up really well. The scraping, the cutting, everything like that. Even the throwing, I was really surprised at how well it held up throwing versus this knife really just falling apart when it was being thrown. The shock was not good for this knife, but this knife held up really nice. The lock still works perfectly fine. It's still very good. And even though the knife broke and took a huge chip out, it's actually still usable. You can still use the tip. You could still use a little bit of the front where it has an edge, so it's still a usable knife, absolutely. It's just the whole middle broke out there. Compared to this knife though, that is what I found interesting, but at the same time, I was kind of expecting that. This is just some cheap stainless steel, and it's probably treated very softly, and they're probably trying to treat the D2 a little bit harder, but again, that does make it brittle, and with those larger carbides, it will allow for breakouts like this, and this knife is just a cheap stainless steel. It is actually pretty tough. Right, the knife itself, it starts loosening up pretty bad with some abuse. The thumb stud's gone, but it has a flipper tab, so that's not a huge deal. But the steel itself, I was prying with it, same as this. The tip didn't bend. I was batoning this one just as hard and a little bit more than I was with this one. And this one held up fine, so that just goes to show, even a cheap steel, if it's soft and thick enough, it's still very strong. So this knife, if you're really gonna abuse the knife, then maybe this one, the steel on here is probably better. But if you're just using a knife and you want edge retention and just standard cutting ability, obviously the D2 is gonna be better. You're just gonna have to be careful that you don't baton it through wood or do other stuff like that where you are, you know, really abusing it, because you can have breakouts like this, and the tip too is very thin. It can bend. It didn't snap, it actually bent, which I was surprised a little bit about that, but it bent, and I actually bent it back so it was still usable after that. That is the D2 Ozark trail knife with another Ozark trail knife thrown in there. Hard use tested. Interesting results here. Can't say I wasn't expecting it, but I was surprised. If you enjoyed this video, please like the video and subscribe, because this Ozark trail sacrificed its knife life for the viewing of this video. It's a good knife. If it comes back in stock, $10, absolutely worth it. Just don't go batoning it through wood and snap the blade. Yeah.